Seth
Hello.
Parnell, and we're glad that you joined us. This is Introduction Part 2.
Okay.
We did not say this last week, but we will say it this week. Chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus are really an introduction to the rest of the book. Chapter 1 is a broad introduction, and now chapter 2 narrows the focus of what is happening. In this chapter, Moses is born. Moses then has a first attempt at trying to be the deliverer of his people. And then Moses moves to Midian. So that is the outline of this. It ends with a comment that God has about God and the people back in Egypt. So we start with the patriarchs, the oppression in Egypt. Then we get to Moses, his birth. He tries to deliver them. And then he moves to Midian. And then it ends, this introduction ends with the problem that they talked about at first becoming much worse. And it's hard to imagine something worse than the Egyptians taking your male children and throwing them into the Nile. It's hard to imagine that. But whatever has happened, well, we won't say that right now. Because we're going to say it at the end. Okay?
Don't spoil it.
Yeah, don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it. All right? Teaser. Okay. So, chapter 2, verse 1 says, "Now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman." It is very interesting here that Moses doesn't mention his parents' names. Now, at the beginning of the introduction, he lists the 12 patriarchs and their father. That's who he lists. And then later in the text, he lists the 2 midwives who would not kill the male children. They just wouldn't do it. So here he doesn't mention the name of his parents. Now, we know the names of his parents, right?
I mean, I've heard them before.
Amram.
Yeah.
Amram,
Yep.
who is the grandson of Levi. And he married Jochebed.
Yeah. I
Jochebed,
do remember that name.
which is the daughter of Levi. So if you have the family tree, you have Levi here. You have Jochebed here. And then over here, her brother, are you picturing this? Had Amram.
Yeah.
And somehow or another, these 2 people fell in love. Now, I don't know if...
They were from West Egypt.
It must have been from West Egypt. Yeah, instead of West Virginia, West Egypt. Very, very good. I'm not sure if she was younger or what. There is another option. The other option is that Jochebed is somewhere else in the Levi tree, and they're about the same age. But we just don't know. Either way, they're marrying within the family. He's either marrying a cousin or an aunt. Okay? So there you go. If you want to read more about that, you can go to Exodus chapter 6, verses 16 through 20, and see where I got that from, just in case you're wondering if what I'm saying is true. It is definitely true. So Jochebed, Moses' great-great-aunt, is also his mother.
This sounds like a Willie Nelson song that I've heard here recently, actually. I am my own grandpa.
Yeah, I am my own grandpa. Yeah, that's right. So later we know in Exodus that is outlawed. You can't do that anymore. But here it definitely happened. Verse 2, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. A couple of things about this particular verse. It seems that there are no other brothers and sisters from that particular verse. But what we do know is Aaron is 3 years older than Moses. And Miriam is older than that because we attribute her to being the older sister. It could be that there's another sister involved, and I'll mention that here in a minute. But chances are it's Miriam that's older than Aaron, and then Moses is the youngest. Okay? That particular word, fine child, is the same exact word that is used in Genesis chapter 1 and part of chapter 2, where God says, and he saw that his creation was good. Or he saw that his creation was fine. And so there's a note here that this creation is a good creation. This child is a good creation. And she saw that he was good. In fact, that same phrase is the same, almost exactly the same as what is said in Genesis chapter 1.
Wow.
Yeah. Verse 3, I think it is. When she could hide him no longer, because he cried, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. And she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. So a couple of things about this. First, we know from last week that there is a decree for all the Egyptians, not just the army. All the Egyptians, when they see a Hebrew boy child, they're supposed to throw them into the Nile. Now, Seth, you don't know this because you don't know this. But the Nile, the Jews actually lived all over Egypt. And sometimes it was a 2 days journey to the Nile. It's my hypothesis that people that lived a 2-day journey from the Nile were not as concerned about their babies being thrown in the Nile because of the distance and what had to happen in order for that to occur as the people that lived right beside the Nile. What we know is that Jochebed and Amram lived near the Nile. In fact, they lived close to the Pharaoh's residence, or a royal residence. They lived near Pharaoh's daughter, is where they lived. And so that's a concern of theirs. They don't want their child to be found. They don't want their child to be thrown into the Nile. They must have seen this happen to other people they know. And so they are in protection mode. I don't know if the child was ugly, if she would have been like, okay, get rid of him. I don't know. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the reason that he's cute, so we'll keep him, right?
I was gonna say this for later, but like, what mother doesn't think that their child is fine?
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's just interesting that it's noted there.
Yeah. Well, other places like Acts chapter 7, Stephen, he says Moses was fair in the sight of God. He says that he's no ordinary child. And in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, it says, by faith they hid him. So this is a faith action, is what's happening here.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, bulrushes is made up of, like, it's papyrus. So it's, what is it? It was used to make papers. Papyrus. So you opened up the reeds.
The reed, yeah. Okay.
And then you made the papers for writing. But the Egyptians also used it for boats and baskets and other things like that. And so you would put pitch on it, of course, to make sure that the water didn't seep through and it didn't sink, right? The word basket here is the same word, Hebrew word, that is used for Noah's Ark.
Wow.
In those passages of Scripture, in Genesis, that word is used 28 times. 28 times. The only other place that word is used is here in Exodus chapter 2. And it's used twice. It's used here and in verse 5.
So she made him a boat.
She made him a boat. A boat of salvation. Because what we need to remember is Moses wrote Genesis, and so he is calling back to things in Genesis. So just like there was salvation in one boat, in water, there is now salvation in one little boat with this little baby. He's not saying that Moses is a savior. He's just saying that there's some salvation happening here. Yeah. Which I think is kind of neat. That little parallel. Yeah. Put the child in it and place it among the reeds. By the way, it's reeds that papyrus is made out of. They break the reeds open, and there it is. By the riverbank. That is important because, first of all, in a reed area, crocodiles do not dwell in a reed area. The reeds also prevent the basket from being carried away by the current down the river.
So Prince of Egypt got it wrong.
Prince of Egypt got it wrong.
Because those crocodiles tried to get Moses.
Yeah, that is wrong. So his sister could watch the basket as it floats in the river, and it was probably where they knew that the daughter of Pharaoh bathed, because they lived in that royal vicinity. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done with him. So that implies that they expected somebody to come, because it was a normal place where somebody came. And so when the Pharaoh's daughter came, she came with an entourage. So while she was bathing, her harem of women would walk around and make sure nobody was looking. Mm-hmm. That's what would happen. Keep it private in that area. So verse 5, now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. And while the young woman walked beside the river, making sure that things were private, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. So she's interested in this basket. In verse 6, and when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. And she took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So she took pity on the Hebrew child. This is why I say the people that lived a day or 2 days journey to the Nile, those babies never made it to the Nile. Along that journey, people felt for those babies and they returned them. I just feel like that happened. I can't prove that happened, but based on some of what's happening here, the baby's crying, you feel bad for a child. Yeah. All those Egyptians were not as crude as Pharaoh.
They had the human compassion that's built into all of us.
Right, yeah. For a baby. And, I'm sure they were thrown into the Nile, but it was by some very wicked people, no doubt. But anyway, she saw the basket. And when she opened it, she saw the child. Behold, the baby was crying. She took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So she identifies it. So what does she do? She says, well, we need to cast it into the Nile because that's what my dad said to do. That is not what she says. She defies what her father had commanded.
Yeah.
Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, so she comes up out of nowhere. It does not say Miriam. It could be another sister, but we're pretty sure it's Miriam. Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother. Now, at this point in time, this was a very overwhelming thing for Moses' mother. She didn't know how it was going to turn out. She was hoping, I believe she was hoping for Pharaoh's daughter to find him and he be saved. And it's happening, and now she's called for. And now she's going to be able to raise her child for at least until he's 9 to 10 years old. Yeah. She was overwhelmed with the way God had worked all this out. Yeah. Verse 9, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So not only does she get to raise her son, but someone is paying her to raise her son. So the woman took the child and nursed him. Verse 10, when the child grew older, probably 9 or 10 years old, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the river. Now Moses' name is a combination of an Egyptian Hebrew dialect. At this point in time, it seems that they were all kind of speaking the same sort of language. So it's a mix of that. There are other people in Scripture, not in Scripture. There are other people that had the same prefix as Moses. But nonetheless, it's a Egyptian Hebrew mix name. That's what it is. I drew him out of the water. So before you comment, I just want to say this. Okay, you have this river. The male babies, are supposed to be thrown into and die. So the river becomes a symbol of death. Then God has one baby placed in a boat, and the river becomes the source of the Jews' salvation.
Yeah, wow.
So he takes what man has done that's evil and turns it into a symbol of good. I think that's pretty powerful.
That's very powerful.
Yeah. And it's one child. I'm not saying Moses was the savior. I'm just saying it's one child.
Right.
He's definitely the deliverer. So there are some parallels to Jesus. Yeah. Death, the death portion, the cross, which was all about death, and then after the cross, it becomes a symbol of life to all that believe.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty powerful.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
So we're in it at the end of that first section, the birth of Moses. So what's your comments?
I mean, it's amazing to see God's hand over all of this, and how the woman the mother had to just take some steps of faith.
Yeah.
I'm going to put my kid in a little boat, like a basket, in the river.
Yeah.
And hope for the best.
Yeah.
And when we have faith, we can always hope for the best. But she didn't know how it was going to turn out.
Didn't know how it was going to turn out.
And ends up actually getting able to nurse her own son and raise him. And that's incredible.
I do think it's interesting that she just didn't put the boat in the water anywhere. Like, faith is making the basket. Faith is putting the pitch on the basket, or the bitumen. Faith is telling your daughter to watch the basket because somebody's going to find it. Faith is, let's put it in this area because we know Pharaoh's daughter bathes in this area. Faith is, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So faith is not just, let's just put it in the water and see where the Nile takes it, like the movie.
Right.
Yeah, and God saves him from the crocodiles and all the hippos and stuff like that. That's not how it happened.
There's definitely a strategy.
There was a strategy because, we are created in the image of God, and that means that we can think and we can plan. But then God takes over and overwhelms us with how he has used what we have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. All right. First attempt at being a deliverer. Here we go. One day when Moses had grown up. So Moses is 40 years old. I mean, just...
So I'm still growing.
Yeah. One day when Moses grew up, he was in the basement playing video games. Yeah. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. Now that particular look is not just looking. It is looking with the intent to find information, to study, to understand what is happening to the people. Okay? And he saw an Egyptian beating one of his people. Now, if you're underlining, you probably should underline that word beating. Okay? Verse 12. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. You can underline that word struck down. Okay? Because struck down and kill is the same word as beating in the Hebrew. Okay? When he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. Now, that particular word struggling means they were in a wrestling match. They were in close physical contact. So one had hit each other, took them to the ground, and they're rolling on the ground. Okay? I'm about to sneeze, so Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Just said blueberry.
I know, I should have. And he said to the man in the wrong, I don't know how he figured that out. Why do you strike, underline that word, your companion? The reason I had you underline those words is that particular word strike is the same word as kill, or strike down is the same word as beat, which is interesting. And he answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill? Underline that word, because that word is the same word as strike, which is the same word as struck down, which is the same word as beating in the text. Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Now, a lot of people read that particular phrase as if this guy is scared. There is nothing that says he is scared. In fact, he's not scared. This is a phrase where he is putting Moses in his place. Just because you saved somebody yesterday and it was an Egyptian doesn't mean that you have the right to speak in to a family squabble that I'm having. Doesn't give you the right. So he puts him in his place. What that guy didn't understand was Moses was the one that was going to be afraid. This guy isn't afraid. But that struck some fear and concern into Moses' heart, because Moses thought, because he looked both ways, that nobody saw this except for the person that was saved, that was rescued. By the way, that particular word rescue there is no, it isn't. Sorry, that's later. Scratch that. Okay? So rescued. And so Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. Now, nothing says that he left immediately. But he did keep his ear to the ground because he knew that this was going to get out. This means that Moses knew that killing the guy was wrong. He looked this way and that. He hid the body in the sand. There was a cover up. He thought nobody else knew, but when he heard this, he knew that he was going to be in trouble. His sin was going to find him out. Moses wrote Exodus, and he starts with, oh, it was a fine child, as good as creation, right? Because, that's humble. Right? And then here it's like, but this fine child became a murderer. And he's a murderer because he started trying to be a deliverer before God called him to be a deliverer. And I think that's his point here in this introduction. So verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Now you can underline kill. Why are you underlining kill?
It's the same as the other words.
It's the same as the other words. It's interesting how many times that particular word is used throughout this passage. When Pharaoh heard it, he sought to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh secretly. That particular word, fled, means he went without anybody really knowing, and stayed in the land of Midian. And he sat down by the well. That particular word, stayed and set, actually comes from the same Hebrew word that means to dwell. So he began to dwell in Midian. A lot of times we see pictures or we see movies or we see something where he's ran from Egypt and he gets to this well and he's just exhausted, right? That is not what happened. He fled to Midian. He started living out on his own as a nomad. Did I say that right? Nomad. Yeah, as a nomad. And so he knew the area. Like some time has passed in that particular phrase. So it could be a couple of weeks, but it's definitely not a day. He did not just arrive. Okay. I think that we do need to pause a moment to note that killing the Egyptian, the text does not say it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
It does not say that he was justified in doing it. This means that we cannot use this text to say if someone is abusing someone, we can kill them and it's okay because the Bible tells us to do that. I mean, we can't use this text to do that. There's no conclusion here that says that. And the other thing I think we need to remember is we need to be careful acting on a self-proclaimed divine call. And there are some people that live their life with a self-proclaimed divine call, and they've really never heard from God that is indeed what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Yeah, that I just think it's interesting that Moses he had a desire to relieve at least this one person of their burden.
Yeah.
But it wasn't time yet. And I've never really looked at it that way. And maybe that's why it ended, or this situation ended the way that it did, turned out the way that it did.
Yeah. God's plan for a deliverer was not just for one person. It was for the whole nation. It was bigger than that one moment.
Yeah.
So killing is murder, and that was wrong. But secondly, that would never be the purpose of God, to do something that small.
Right.
It just didn't have the impact that needed to happen in order for freedom to occur for everybody else.
Yeah. That's it. So I'm trying to think back to like some things I've learned about translations, but why would it use the same word here, but in the English it would use the struck down and all the other different words?
Well, there is some validity to that. Striking down death, it's the same. Kill is the same word.
It's the nuance.
It's the nuance of it. And Hebrew, we have to remember, is a contextual language. So the reason I'm bringing it up, that it's kill and strike down, we need to understand that the blows that they were taking were deadly blows.
Right.
Like they were blows that could bring somebody to death. And that's what's being communicated.
Yep. Okay.
These people didn't die, but they were about to kill each other. The Egyptian was about to kill this guy.
It wasn't just a squabble.
Yeah, it wasn't just a little slap and whatever. And these two Jews were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
One of them could have lost their life with the intensity. I didn't say that right.
Yeah.
Yeah, intensity of that fight. The intensive nature of that fight. It sounds more educated.
It was intense.
It's intense, man. It's intense.
Yeah,
all right.
No, that's cool.
So as we go into this next section, we need to understand that Moses isn't exhausted when he has his next confrontation. Okay?
Gotcha. Yeah.
All right. Verse 16, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, because that's the number of perfection. And they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. It was the job of the women to get water. The job of the women to water the flock. That was their job, their station in life. Verse 17, the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. What we need to understand here is that they drove them away after they had filled their water pots to take them back. They drove them away in order to take the water pots, do what they needed to do with it, and then leave them empty so the women would have to fill them back up. These are shepherds that are bullies. And Moses has observed this before. He knows this about them. And on this particular day, he's ready for them. Okay. Verse 18, when they came home to their father, Reuel, which is also Jacob, by the way, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? This also implies that these ladies went to the well, and every day that they've gone to the well, the shepherds would take their water And so it would take additional time to refill the water pots in order to get back home. So today they're home in half the time.
Wow.
Do you see it?
Yep.
They're home half the time. And they said, an Egyptian delivered us. That particular word, deliver, is the same word that's used when the children of Israel cross the Red Sea and are delivered from the Egyptians. An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock. I think it's crazy that the Red Sea, that word is used, and it's water, right? So water is involved in this deliverance. So then you even throw back to Moses is found in the water. So you have this water deliverance sort of theme that Moses is weaving through this text. Do you see it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what it all means, but it's definitely a theme that's woven.
Well, then you go back even further to Genesis and Noah.
Noah in water.
Yeah. That's interesting.
He was delivered by water. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And he said to the daughters, then, where is he? You idiots. Why didn't you ask him to come here? This is a guy that we want around. Right? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. So Jethro, or Ruel, is saying, this is a great guy. We need him to be a part of our team. Let's figure out who he is. Okay? And come and eat bread. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughters Zipporah. A couple of things about that. That particular word, dwell, is the same word that's used in verse 15, stayed and sat. It's the same Hebrew word there. So he's dwelling. So it's just not, I sat down just for a few minutes. It's, I'm dwelling there. Okay? And Zipporah actually means a small bird. Now, we pause here a moment because this is not the first Jew that has left home and got a foreign wife. Isaac and Rebekah, even though Rebekah's in the same, is a foreign wife, right? Jacob, Leah, and Rachel are foreign wives. You can make an argument that they are within the same family because they were all related, right? Not as closely as, Moses' father and mother, but they were closely related. But Joseph definitely went to Egypt and married an Egyptian woman that served another god. So this is a reminder of that. So now Moses is marrying a Midianite. Now, Midianites come from one of Abraham's descendants. Let me see if I can find her name real quick. Yeah. Keturah? Keturah is his wife's name. This is, of course, after his other wife died, and she bore him sons. Sarah. It's after Sarah died and bore him sons. And so they became the Midianites. So way, 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 way back, they are related. Okay. And so this is probably how Jethro, or Ruel, same person, knows God, and he's a priest of the Most High God. That particular phrase that he's a priest of the Most High God also throws back to Melchizedek, who was a priest of the Most High God. So there were other people that were following God besides the Jews. That had faith in God besides the Jews. We sometimes get the concept the Jews were the only ones, and if you didn't join them, then you weren't a part of God's family. But God was actually working in other people as well. Yeah, it's getting there. Verse 22, and she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, right? For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. Now, some people take that two different ways, just taken two different ways. One is he realized he was a sojourner in a foreign land in Egypt. I don't really think that's it. I think he was away from his people, and now he's a sojourner in the Midian land, and he's referencing that with that name. So before we end this, with the last couple of verses, what's your thoughts?
Well, our goat, our buck, his name is Ziggy. His dad's name was Gershom.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. So that was one of my thoughts.
Wow. Okay. Well.
But, yeah.
And Gershom's dad, of course, was Moses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and it could have been. That could have been what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we should have named Ziggy something else.
Yeah, you should have.
But, you know.
You didn't. You missed out.
No, I think it's interesting. You know, usually I think of the people of Israel. I mean, that's God's chosen people.
Yeah.
And they follow Yahweh. Mm-hmm. But Abraham had lots of descendants, and they went all over the place.
Right.
And so Yahweh, the idea of worshiping Yahweh was not just these people. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
So the priest of Midian was worshiping Yahweh.
Because we're all accountable for the knowledge of God that we have to pass on to generations. And obviously, from Abraham to Jethro here, it was passed on.
Yeah.
And so much so that he had faith in it to become a priest of the Most High God. Yeah.
Yeah. But then Moses, again, rescued him with a savior.
Yeah.
For these women. That's really cool.
Which shows that Moses had a value for people that were oppressed and for people to be valued. And once you pick up on that in the text, you can see how he did that the rest of his life. He really valued people. He wanted to make sure they were not oppressed, and he wanted to make sure that justice was done.
Yeah.
So that was his heartbeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I didn't say this before, but because he grew up in the Egyptian palace, he was educated. And it wasn't just with wisdom that the Egyptians had. He was also taught how to fight. And so there is a belief that he even led some of the Egyptian armies.
Oh, wow.
In his lifetime.
Wow.
Which would explain some of his strategies as he battled other people.
Yeah.
And what he passed on to Joshua. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
All right, verse 23, and we'll wrap this up. During those many days, the king of Egypt died. The people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. So the king of Egypt has died. The Pharaoh has died. Another one has replaced this Pharaoh, and he is worse than the first one. So we don't know what all is going on here. But we know that it is bad. And so, whereas they were not crying out to God for a deliverer up until this point, they've now been pushed to the place where they are crying out for one. Was it bad when Moses was there? Absolutely, because the guy was beating him to death, and it says that they were whipped, and it says that they were oppressed, but they were never pushed to the place where they were crying out for deliverance, where they were desperate for deliverance. I think an application point here is people don't wait to pray for deliverance. If something is happening that's bad, pray for it that it will go away before you're in a desperate state. God is waiting for you to ask. He's waiting for you to cry out to him. Don't wait till it's horrible. He could actually save you sooner than later. Moses is already here. Your deliverer. If they had been praying, maybe Moses would have been called to deliver them, and they would have been out of there earlier. That is a hypothesis. Okay. But nonetheless, it's a fact. Go ahead and pray, is the point. Their cry for a rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Now let's pause here a moment. He didn't all of a sudden hear their cries and was like, oh, doggone it, I forgot that I made a promise to Abraham and I probably need to do something with these people. The reason that we know that is, first of all, they were multiplying. You weren't here last week, but they were multiplying, and that shows the blessing of God and the fulfillment of the covenant. God has sent Moses. It's definitely a baby that's sent from God to be a deliverer. Definitely that. He's already actively involved. So this remembering isn't, oh, I forgot the covenant. Oh, yeah, I probably need to do something. It's not that. But it is a sense in which their prayers cause God to have active engagement with their issue. Not that he didn't know it was there, but because they were crying out to him, he moved, which is another thing about prayer. When you pray, you move the heart of God. You move him into action. It's not that you're telling him anything that he didn't know or trying to get him to remember something. It's not that. You're moving his heart to act on whatever condition you're praying about.
Yeah.
Yeah. So God saw the people of Israel, and God knew, which means, and God is now moving to solve that problem. Though he was already moving to solve the problem. But that sets up chapter 3. And that ends the introduction to Exodus. Yeah. So next week we get down to the nitty gritty.
Wow, that sounds fun.
Yeah. So any comment on that last part?
Yeah, I mean, our prayers change things. Like it, God's moving. You know, he's sovereign. He's got his thing that he's doing, but he's also actively listening to our prayers.
Right.
He wants us to be engaged in that. And yeah, it's just encouragement to keep doing it. Keep praying.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening if you're listening on the podcast. And we will see you next week. Grace and peace.